Okay.
Yes, you can come here. There we go. I'll sit down.
Well, timekeeper needs someone to stop this stimulating discussion, so I will take this role. First of all, Professor Heckman, thank you very much for your stimulating lecture. And as a president of this university, I particularly appreciate that you quoted Yukichi Fukuzawa, the founder of my university, at the beginning of your lecture. Though I happen to be a university president, I am also an economist by training, so I really enjoyed your lecture. And as the head of an educational institution, which includes primary schools through graduate school, I, again, appreciate that you sort of emphasize the importance of education, particularly in the childhood. So I can quote your result every time, whenever I speak to my student, particularly, young student. Well, Professor Akabayashi requested me to make some sort of comprehensive comment, but I think time is also running. So in order to save time, instead of making a comprehensive comment, let me just ask one question relating to my own, research agenda, by which I mean the employment of older people. As you know, in order to cope with an aging population, it is extremely important for us to promote the employment of older people. And in this respect, it is extremely, again, important for us to maintain the work ability or capability of older workers in their 60s or even in their 70s. So I'm just curious to know, is there any sort of empirical evidence that shows the skills you obtain in your childhood or ability you obtain in childhood really still have a positive impact on the workability or capability of you in your older age, like in your 60s or 70s. I have no idea about if there are any empirical evidence or result on that. And finally, if I am allowed to ask, I am very much interested in the fact that you are still very productive in your 70s, if my understanding is correct, like writing lots of papers with your young colleagues. So I would appreciate it if you would talk about your case as well as the empirical evidence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, just
Okay, first things first, in terms of the capabilities of older people. I mean, one thing I forgot to mention, of course, is one of the reasons why Japan needs to and must develop more educated people, people with higher level of capability, is precisely the demography of Japan, in the sense that it really needs human capital. And a substitute for bodies is skills. And, of course, a more educated workforce, aging, young workforce, both would be very important. Secondly, if you look at the life cycle of these capabilities, it has been studied by the psychologists. And what you do see is changes in these capabilities over the life cycle. So older people become more conscientious. It is the case, though, and this has been well studied, it's an unfortunate finding, that older people find it harder to learn new things. I mean, you can see this. Industrial systems. For example, when somebody introduces a new word processing system or a new kind of computer technology, and when workers of different ages are offered this opportunity to stay on and learn the new technology or retire, that you see a very strong relationship with age. The older workers typically will not want to engage. And we do see it. We see it. You see young children learning computers and learning new games, things very quickly. So there's a lot of intuitive knowledge, but it's actually formally studied. On the other hand, it is the case, though, that we continue to learn throughout the life cycle. And individuals with greater capabilities continue to learn. So, for example, we've studied, for example, accountants, engineers, and people into the 60s, and asking the more able people, the ones who are highly motivated, if you build that skill base, they continue to learn. They continue to renew their skills. They continue to advance. So it's not a question of being impossible to learn. It's just that it's kind of a relative target. So certainly we don't want to forget the young children. But it's also the case that older people can learn, and they can learn quite a bit, and can learn. And in fact, we know that even in the 80s and 90s, that neurogenesis continues. There's still people renewing cells, so it's not as if it's all over at a certain age. So I think we can do that. But I still think in terms of social policy, if we imagine a lifetime ahead of us, and we're looking at the young children and the old children, and older people, we can say, well, where is the dollar or the yen most profitably invested? Probably in the early years relative to the later years. But it's still the case that we can enhance the skills. And it is the case, of course, that older people can play tremendous roles in the sense of providing, they have skills. And of course, we know that there's a lot of studies about adolescent risk-taking and so forth. Older people may be more set in their ways, but on the other hand, they may have more wisdom. So there are some trade-offs there. So I think there's plenty of use, and there's plenty of ability to train. But the fact is, I did study this even before I got involved in looking at early childhood programs. Job retraining programs are typically less effective the older the worker. So for example, even at 45 or 50 in the United States, we tried programs to retrain unemployed steel workers, for example. And we found that those people in the 40s and 50s, late 40s, early 50s, were much less likely to benefit from those programs to participate. Why? Partly because of the motivation. They said, well, I don't have that much time left to work. I'm going to retire. And so I would argue you should, they would argue, well, I shouldn't really make the investment. So that's part of the problem. So that also suggests in terms of policy for Japan, you might want to increase the retirement age. I know that may not be popular politically, but it certainly would give people a greater incentive to acquire those skills. So I think there can be some investment. Now you're asking me personally. Well, I don't know. It's hard to say. I've only lived one lifetime, and so I can't say. I'm not, you say in my 70s. I barely, I am in my 70s. I turned 70, but only 6 months ago. So I'm early on. Who knows? Ask me back when I'm 75 or so. We'll see. But it's just a question that I find this work very interesting. And I think the whole reason, and one thing that's nice about the University of Chicago, the environment I've been in, is that it's very stimulating. And when you have intelligent people like Professor Akabayashi, whose work has actually played a very big role in shaping some of this work I talked about today, it's very stimulating. So it's kind of an occupational gain. I feel very lucky to actually be able to work on things that, I don't know if it's a job. You can work, I spend many hours, and my wife would testify, too many hours on looking at economics and so forth. But it's not work in the same sense. You actually, when you engage a child, when you engage students, when you engage a problem and solve it, it's a very high level of satisfaction, very satisfying. And I still find the satisfaction. What I don't like is faculty meetings and academic politics. That I'd be happy to retire from altogether. But in terms of learning, it's stimulating. And something like this is intriguing. And I find that as I've gotten into this work and worked with people across the field, not just in economics. First of all, I see the power of economics. Economics helps to organize thinking across many fields. And secondly, I realize that economics can also be enriched. So it's not just a question of saying economics is conquering these fields. It's using this information, working, and I find it just very interesting. So it's a question of curiosity. There's a famous economist at the University of Chicago about 100 years ago, Thorstein Veblen. He wrote the book, The Theory of the Leisure Class, when he was at the university. And he wrote a book about workmanship. It's called The Instinct of Workmanship. But he actually had a theory that kind of rivaled Sigmund Freud's theory about the instincts that motivated us. One was craftsmanship, that many of us like to be craftsmen, whether or not it's in writing a paper, whether or not it's in finishing a cabinet, building a car, doing something well. There's a pride. There's a pride in doing something well. So that's the instinct that people have. But I think there's also this instinct of idle curiosity, right? That we sit around, and I've been very lucky in my life to be able to ask questions that are very, very obscure sometimes, and find, in some cases, that the answers to those questions have been useful to other people, but gratifying to me to know the answer. So that keeps me going. So that's the short. That's a danger. Yeah, academic administration can get in the way. So I'm not, that's why I'm saying I'm not a very good politician, academic or otherwise. I probably shouldn't have talked about affirmative action, for example, but I'm not running for office, and I never will. And nobody would ever make me a chairman of a department or a president of a university. But I do like talking to bright students, learning from people, and even this comparison we just saw between Denmark and the US. And I hope Denmark and Japan. So that gets us some very important information. Denmark is held up as this ideal, right? Great social mobility. And yet family background was playing the same role. It wasn't money. And it wasn't even some of these aspects of schooling. To me, that's very interesting. So what is it? We need to know more. As long as we don't know, it's an interesting thing. It's interesting not only for me to do it, but to watch others do it. And even for watching others to do it better. That's good too. So. Okay, so that's a long-winded answer to your question.
Thank you very much.